start recording now, so that way we can share this with other students. So that is just started. Okay. I guess I'm just going to go for it then. Sorry, I'm kind of an awkward presenter, so this is going to be an interesting experience for me, especially over Zoom, but I hope you find it helpful. Before I really get going though, I just wanted to tell you briefly what it is that we'll be doing today. So I've divided this up into a couple sections. First, I'm going to do a brief introduction to me and my background, because when I think about resumes, I think about it in terms of my experience a lot, so that helps me give examples. So I'm going to introduce you to me. I'm going to talk a little bit about some basics of a resume, but I'm kind of going into this assuming that all of you at least have an idea of what a resume is. I don't know if you've written one before, but you kind of know the basics. So I'm going to cover that quickly. But really what I'd like to talk about more is how to work on ways to come up with a strong resume, ways that you can adjust what you've done before to make your job application really strong. I'm the kind of person who really likes notes and studying. So I've come up with a list of resources that you can use. So you'll have an hour session with me, but when you're done, you'll have a list of websites and other helpful things that can help you while you're making your own resume, including people that you can reach out to for help. And I'm blanking on something, but I'm sure I'll come to it. And then I will talk, but not for very long, about the different sections of a resume, how to actually put it together, because again, I think that's something that you will have time to do on your own, and the resources that I'm sharing will allow you to do some of the nuts and bolts outside of this session. After that, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about what an employer is looking for in a resume. It really was when I started working on hiring committees. So the group of people in charge of putting out applications and reviewing them and interviewing candidates, it was really when I started doing that I got to see a lot of examples of what were great resumes and what were not great resumes. So rather than have me tell you about that, because I've only done it a little bit, a friend of mine who works in human resources at Parkland is going to spend some time telling you about her experience and really hopefully give you some tips about what makes a strong resume and what an employer is looking for. So hopefully you'll find that useful as well. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have some time for questions at the end. And like I said, stop me while I'm talking if you've got questions in the meantime. Okay. I believe you were emailed a couple of documents that might be helpful after this. So one of them is a handout that I created, really just with my information, my email address, in case you want to email me. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Also listed on here are some websites that I will talk about that can help you with the resume, but this way you have the direct links on there and you don't have to write it down as I'm telling you. So hopefully that will be helpful. And then the other document that was set out, this is available on Parkland College's Career Services webpage. It's their resume guide. If you haven't had a chance to look at this yet, it's really fantastic. It's a 13-page document about basically every single thing that goes into a resume, and it's a worksheet. So it actually has instructions for what you should think about in terms of all of your jobs, and then spaces to list the information they ask for. So it's a good way to get started with actually putting things on a resume. And this is the document that I'm going to be using to talk about the contents of a resume. Also in this document are at least 5 or 6 sample resumes. Like I mentioned before, it really helps me to look at examples, and these are some really good ones. So I think this will be helpful once you've got sort of a basic resume set up to get an idea of what you could use or what a resume could look like. So hopefully you'll find that helpful as well. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Okay, sorry. Okay, so first of all then, maybe I should have done it sooner, but I wanted to give you a quick introduction to myself. My name, which I did not put on this, this screen, is Julia Hawthorne. I was going to put my fancy professional headshot, but this is pretty much what I look like when I'm working from home, sitting on the couch with my cats. So as I mentioned, I wanted to give you a brief history of my work experience, because I think it kind of helps to illustrate what it looks like when I construct a resume. So I graduated from college with a degree in English, which was a really fun degree to do, but a little bit hard to figure out what it was that I wanted to do for a job with a degree in English. After I graduated, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I spent time in a lot of different retail jobs. So before the whole company closed down, I worked for Borders bookstores. I was a cashier, I was a bookseller, I did inventory, so shelving books, and then I was eventually a supervisor in charge of some of the payroll, office functions, and training people. I also worked for a number of years at a coffee shop in LA called the Coffee Bean. It's basically California's answer to Starbucks. So I did all the regular coffee shop things, making drinks, serving desserts, taking orders. I also worked as a supervisor there. So I did scheduling, ordering, inventory, money handling, deposits, that kind of thing. I didn't want to work in retail forever, so eventually I thought maybe I could be an accountant. So I actually came to Parkland College and took some accounting classes. And while I was doing that, I got a job doing taxes part-time. I did that for a year, and that eventually led to a job at Parkland. So my first full-time job at Parkland was working in the business office, helping students with their Parkland accounts. So tuition bills, payments, and that sort of thing. Eventually from there, I moved to the financial aid office as an advisor, where I would work with students to help them understand financial aid, to adjust their financial aid. And then I did some behind the scenes work with student loans, setting it up on Parkland's end and organizing and reconciling. Where I currently work at Parkland is TRIO, which is an office that supports students in different ways. So I work as an advisor, so advising students on classes, probably a lot of things you get from Swift advisors. So academics, job applications, transferring. I also do a lot of work with the budget and understanding Department of Education regulations. So a lot of different things. And what I kind of wanted to get at with this long introduction is this is not necessarily the career path that I expected to take. So 15 years ago when I graduated with a degree in English, my plan was not, okay, I'm going to become director of TRIO at a community college. I kind of bounced around to a lot of really different jobs, and it was sort of a winding path to get here. Because my point with that is nobody has a perfect career path. Nobody moves exactly from one job to the next exactly the way that they expected. It's pretty unexpected and it can change very quickly. So part of what happens when you're writing a resume, especially when you're applying for a job that you want, is to figure out the connections between your background, the classes that you've taken, the jobs that you've had, and how they make you a unique applicant for the job that you're applying for. So that's something that I'm really going to be talking about today, and how to wrap your mind around it, I guess. Okay, so moving right along. Like I said, I'm kind of assuming that you understand the basics of what a resume is. So a document, 1 to 2 pages, that has the vital information about you. So how to contact you, your education, what degree you have, and what your work experience is, all of your qualifications that make you a strong applicant for whatever job that you're applying for. And to me, that can at the same time sound really simple, but also kind of terrifying. There's a lot of things to put on there. So it helps to break it up into sort of defining what you're trying to do with the resume, I guess. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I keep getting wild with the mouse. Okay. So one thing that I want to make clear, that a resume is a marketing document. It's something that you are creating to demonstrate your skills and your background and what it is about you that makes you unique and a strong candidate for the job. you get to decide what goes on there. On the other hand, it's not an autobiography. A resume is not a list of every single thing that you have ever done. You kind of get to think about the job that you're applying for, what that person is looking for, and think about what it is in your background that would make them say, oh, this person would be a good person for this job. So for example, when I was applying to be a director of Trio, yes, I worked in a coffee shop for 4 years making coffee drinks, but that wasn't super relevant to the Trio job. Instead, I might have said I worked in the coffee job for 4 years, building relationships with customers and coworkers, sort of spinning it for what it is that I did in that job that would make me a good applicant for the job that I'm looking for. And I'm happy to share this presentation, the slides with you as well, if that helps afterwards. Another thing that I really want to hit home today is that your resume is your chance to show why you are the perfect applicant and the perfect fit for each job that you're applying for. A resume is not a one-size-fits-all sort of document, and this can be a little bit confusing because I think it's sort of changed over time. So like when I was in high school and I was applying for part-time jobs at Burger King or the grocery store or whatever, back then I did print up a resume that, you know, basically said I was a high school student and had not had a lot of jobs, but I printed up a resume and I handed that out to every job that I applied for. That's not really the way that we do that quite a few years later. Now, when you're applying for jobs, more than likely you are going online, doing an online job application and submitting a resume as part of that. And what that means is the resume that you submit for a job application should ideally be different from a resume that you submitted for a different job application. Each job that you apply to, you want to think about making your resume fit that particular job. Because you want the employer to look at your resume and, like I said earlier, see all those great things about you that mean you would be really good at what they're looking for in this position. It's also your first impression in a lot of cases on a potential employer. So they don't know anything about you other than what you have presented to them on this 1 or 2 page document. So like I said, it's really your chance to show off a little bit, to show why you're special and why you have unique experiences that can make you a strong person in this position. In a lot of cases, if you're applying online to jobs, you're filling out a big old job application that does ask for every job that you've ever had in a lot of detail. And so your resume is your chance to kind of be selective about the information that you put on there. It doesn't have to be an exhaustive list of everything. Again, sort of thinking about making the most of the space that you have, I guess. Let's see, and I feel like this is repeating the same thing a little bit, but what you're trying to do with the resume is making the connections between what you've done, your experience, and what an employer is looking for. So if you have a job posting that you're looking at, let's say it's a job posting for an academic advisor at Parkland. This is the world that I know. And it says, we need somebody who is comfortable giving presentations to large groups of people. Then you are going to look at your experience and say, okay, what in my job history shows that I'm comfortable giving presentations to large groups of people? So I could have said, well, when I worked as a writing tutor in college, I organized group workshops with 10 to 15 students. That's the information that you want to put on there so that the employer can understand what it is that you've done that would make you a good admissions advisor who's given presentations before. So yes, you are describing yourself. This is not the time to be humble. You want to brag about what you've done because you have done some great things. But I just want to warn you to never ever misrepresent yourself or lie on the resume. You want to be able to spin what you have done to make it sound good. But you don't want to make anything up because more often than not, they will find out and it will be messy. And then finally, I know this sounds like a lot and it sounds a little bit complicated, but the nice thing about a resume is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's been done for a long time. There are standard accepted ways of doing a resume. They all look more or less pretty similar. So there are some good templates out there for you to put your information into. So it's not something that you have to panic about. There's lots of resources out there to help you. Okay. Let's see. So going on then, as I mentioned before, I could talk about resumes for a long time, but it is really helpful for me to actually have examples and things to look at, as well as to know where to go if I need help. So I have a couple of suggestions. There are lots of places where you can get free resume help. I mean, you can just Google online, you'll find some stuff. But I'm going to share a couple of the ones that I really like that I think are good places to get you started. And these are listed on that handout. I also mentioned it before, but it's a great idea to look at lots of examples. And by the way, I used it mostly for decoration on my slides. You're going to see these little sample resumes here. I pulled these directly from that handout from Parkland Career Services. So don't worry about memorizing it here. You can get it in that handout or on Parkland's website. So it's really helpful for me to look at examples, to think about how I want to format and lay it out. That doesn't mean that you should copy the content of a sample resume. So for example, even if I had worked at, what was this? Jessica Ortega has worked at Clark Lindsay Village. Even if I had worked that exact same job and done those exact same things, I want to put it in my own words and think about my own experience, because that you want it to be unique to you, I guess. An employer doesn't want to look at 20 resumes that are exactly the same, because that's not going to help you distinguish yourself. And then finally, once you have a draft, a working draft or a final draft, have somebody else look at it, have a couple somebodies if you can. They can check it to make sure you don't have any spelling or grammar errors. They can also advise you on things that you might want to change. And again, I'm going to recommend a couple of people who can do that for you. So of those resources, I think the easiest one to do would be Parkland Career Services. So you may have met Brennan Hightower. She is Parkland's career counselor. She works full-time in counseling and advising, helping not just Parkland students, but people in the community with their job search things. So Parkland's Career Services has some great information on the website. They have that 13-page handout that I shared with you. They have tips on writing a resume. And like I said, I don't want to reinvent the wheel, so I'm using a lot of their information and tips. Also really good to know is that you can make an appointment with Brennan, the career counselor, to look over your resume. So if after today you're feeling fired up and you write something out, or you already have something, you can make an appointment with her to look at it and give you some constructive advice. So I would start with Parkland because it's right there at your fingertips. It's easy to get to. My next recommendation is the Champaign Public Library. If you live in the area, you get access for free. You can get a free library card. Even if you don't live in this district, if you have a different home library, I'm willing to bet they have job resources as well. Champaign's library has a whole series of presentations on job searching and resumes and cover letters, that sort of thing. They have access to a resource called Job Now, which has more sample resumes and advice. And kind of like with Parkland, you can make an appointment with a librarian to look over your resume and give you advice. So that'll really come in handy as well. And then my final recommendation, you may have heard of lynda.com. It's now called LinkedIn Learning. It's basically a website that has lots of how-to videos, especially for professional development. All Parkland students get free access to LinkedIn Learning. So I've put the website on here and on the handout to show you how to get your free account. But as an example, typed in resume in their search bar, and they came up with a number of, you can see, quite lengthy videos and classes on how to put together a resume from different people. So I thought that was really helpful just to get more advice and more resources. Okay. So now that I've talked a bit about the background a little bit, I do know that, like I said, you're familiar with the basics, but I just want to run through the sections on a resume really quickly to make sure that we don't forget anything. And again, here's another nice sample resume that you can look at for reference as well. So the first thing that every good resume is going to have is information about you and how to get in touch with you, usually near the top. My resume, it has everything. It has my address, my phone number, my email address, because you want to make it very easy for an employer to reach you. I think Parkland's website had some advice about use a professional sounding email address, not, I'm not even going to guess what a non-professional email is, so you can imagine. And just so you know, you can order the sections of the resume differently depending on what you're applying for or what your background is, but those are sort of the fine details that you get to work out or that you can talk to with a career counselor. In general, one of the sections that's near the top is either going to be an objective or a summary of qualifications. An objective is often something like explaining what sort of job you're looking for. So an objective could be to secure a job as a supervisor at a clothing retailer. It may depend on what you're applying for, but I don't love the objective section. I kind of feel like if I'm applying to work at Macy's, I don't need to write at the top of the resume, I would like to get a job at Macy's. I think they know that. Instead, I recommend sort of a different twist on that, which is called a summary of qualifications. This is kind of a quick summary of the really important things to know about you, why you're the perfect candidate. So, you know, organized professional with 5 years of office management experience, sort of those highlights that they will get to know later on in your resume. But as the first thing, the potential employer will see good information about you. In the handout, the career services handout, there's lots of examples of these and how to start thinking about your qualifications. So don't feel like you have to write down, you know, everything I come up with off the top of my head. Obviously on your resume, you are going to list your education. If you have a college degree, you probably don't need to worry about putting high school on there. And then maybe most importantly, you're also going to put your professional experience. So your work experience, the different jobs that you've held, which can include internships, things that show that you have work experience that would make you a good employee. Some optional things, depending on your background, are things like awards that you've received, certifications, if you got a certificate in something outside of school, professional development, if you've done workshops or other training, if you volunteer or do community service, those are things that you could put on there, but again, only as they relate to you. And then references aren't usually included in the resume, but it's good to have ready as well. And in the handout, there's a guide to putting those together also. Okay, so now that I've gone over the sections a little bit, I want to talk about at least my process for putting together a resume. And I don't think I can say it enough, so I'm going to say it again. But if you are applying for different jobs that are slightly different from each other, each resume that you submit should be slightly different from your other resumes. Because when you are creating a resume for a particular job, again, it's using that resume to explain why you fulfill all of the requirements for that job. Part of that is really understanding the job that you're applying for. So the method that I'm going to recommend might take a little bit more work than just creating a resume, but you can do with it what you will. So what I suggest is creating something that I'm calling a master resume. So a master resume is, to my mind, never a resume that you're actually going to turn into anybody. It's sort of your working draft that you pull information from when you create individual resumes. So what I mean by that is, in my master resume, I'm going to list every single job that I've ever done. So I don't know if I mentioned before, but I tutored for a couple years in college. And so I would put that on there. I'm sure I have some, I worked part-time as a receptionist in a doctor's office for a while. I didn't mention that, but that is something that I've done. So make a detailed list of every job that you've ever done. It helps to know dates, locations, and things that you did at that job. So just make a quick list for your own reference. Things that you accomplished there, people who knew you, who could be references. So everything with work, and then another list of everything with your educational accomplishments. So you all are completing a degree or certificate. Think about what GPA you got, which are the classes that you excelled in. Maybe you did a really fantastic project where you got some real world experience. Everything related to that that shows why you might be a strong employee somewhere. And then also another list of those extra things that I talked about before. So related experiences, activities, community services, anything that could demonstrate your qualifications for a particular job. So this is going to take some time. This is the heavy lifting of the resume, is thinking about what you've done, and get as detailed as possible. Put everything on there because, like I said, you're not turning this into an employer. You're just using this to sort of get your own thinking process going. Then when you are looking at a particular job to apply for, that's when you create a resume for that job. So I mentioned this a little bit early, but you really want to look at what that job is asking for. So in most job postings, they'll say, you know, we're looking for a person to do this job. Here's a list of duties. Here's minimum qualifications. You know, we need you to have a high school degree and 2 years of experience doing whatever. Look at what they're looking for this job and take some time to research what somebody in that job does, what would make a good employee. And then after you've really thought about that, look at your master resume and look at all the things on there that might show why you fulfill those job requirements. And that's when you go ahead and construct that individual resume with the relevant information. You know, depending on how long your job history is, maybe you've only worked in 2 or 3 jobs, you can definitely list all of those jobs on your resume, but you might talk about different things for those jobs. So for example, if I am applying for a job as an accountant who sits in an office and never works with customers, when I talk about my experience as a financial aid advisor, I will say I kept track of student loans, I made adjustments, I worked with the government to make sure everything was correct, I did reconciliation. I'm not going to spend as much time talking about how I answered phone calls and I worked one-on-one with students, because that isn't information that's as relevant to the job that I'm applying for. And I hope that makes sense. Let's see. So yeah, you'll have your master resume as sort of the list to pick and choose the important things to put on each resume that you make. And I know I said you'll have different resumes for each jobs, but if you're applying for similar sorts of jobs, your resumes can be similar. But if you're applying for a job as a construction worker and a job as a librarian, you're going to have a very different resume for those 2 jobs because they're so different. Once you know what information you want to put on the resume, that's when you can start thinking about how to order it, how to format it and make it look nice. You don't want to do anything too fancy. You want it to be easy to read and something that makes sense. And this is where it really helps for me to look at all of those examples because there's lots of ways to style your resume, but ultimately they're all fairly clean and easy to read. And then I do recommend writing your summary of qualifications last, that sort of list of the major things about you. Because once you've written all of your work experience and your education and your other activities, the summary of qualifications is a way to tie all of those in together. So for example, my resume would say coffee shop, bookstore, taxes, and financial aid and trio. But then I can say something like education professional with over 15 years of customer service experience. It's a way of summarizing everything that you've done so that somebody can understand it quickly in just one line or two. Sorry, I didn't realize my video was off. Okay, so once you've done that, you want to review and revise it a lot. You're going to go through it and make changes, have a couple people that you trust read it over for you so that they can give you feedback, and sort of work on polishing that up. Okay. Janelle's asking if you still get access, I'm guessing, to the LinkedIn Learning if you're no longer at Parkland. I think your account lasts for at least 6 months to a year after you're not taking classes. So definitely check that out. It may be that you can get access to LinkedIn Learning through the Champaign Library. They used to have that, but I don't know if they still do. So definitely check that out. Sorry, I just saw that question. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, awesome. And I see Shamir, you had an answer to that. Thank you. Okay. Okay, I have some screenshots here from the resume worksheet, but I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because I think this is something that you can do on your own. So that worksheet actually goes through the different sections of the resume and has places that you can fill in to show examples of your specific background. It also shows you a nice way to format it, which is nice. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I think it tells you pretty much what you need to do on there. So there's the education section. There's your work experience section. I don't want to get too deep into this, but there are different ways to order your experience on your resume. The most common way is reverse chronological, which means your oldest job first. I'm sorry, your oldest job last and your present job first. So my resume at the top, it would say director of trio, and then financial aid advisor, and then cashier, and then, so on. If you are switching jobs, so for example, let's see, let's say you were me and you worked in retail for 5 years, and then you decided that you wanted to be the cashier at Parkland. In that case, it might make sense to talk about the most relevant job first. So when I applied to be cashier at Parkland, let's say I had my most recent job had been the coffee shop, but I did taxes 5 years ago. I would think about maybe putting the taxes job first because that's closer to the Parkland cashiering, and sort of do it in order of what is most relevant. That is a way that some people do it, but it can get a little complicated. I think for the most part, it makes sense to go in order chronologically so that if an employer is looking at it, they can say, okay, she's doing this now. Before that, she did this and this, and it makes sense. Sorry, I got a little weird introducing that. That might be a question to ask. If it's something you're interested in doing, ask Brennan, the career advisor, or whoever it is that's helping you with your resume. That would be something to think about. There's information, and I kind of covered this a little bit as well, the objective section versus the summary of qualification. So I like this, like I said, the summary of qualifications, because the handout gives you some good examples of things that you might highlight on the resume. For example, on this one here where it says she has bilingual teaching experience in Spanish and English, that might not be something that came up on the job duties or the accomplishments in the job description. So a good place to highlight it is the summary of qualifications. Okay, and then it has the options for the potential extra things as well. And I think, since we're getting low on time and I've been talking for a long time, I'm not going to go through these tips individually because they are all online, I believe, with the handout as well. on Parkland's website, but just some extra sort of tips and information when you're thinking about putting your resume together. Okay, so before we move to the next section, are there any other questions that you have at this point?
I just got a question. If you're out of work for years and you call up your old what do you call it, references, and you can't really get in touch with anyone because it's been almost a decade, how do you go about trying to fill that void?
That's a good question. Yeah. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Borders, but that company shut down years ago. So I completely understand that. Ideally, it does help to have more recent references anyway. So if you haven't been working in the past couple of years, somebody who knows you from school would potentially be a good reference, maybe an instructor or a counselor that you have a relationship with who knows your work. At the very least, if there's somebody that you worked with at this previous job who can maybe just serve as a coworker reference, that could help. But in general, I think well, it kind of depends on the job. I don't know that when you're applying to a job, they're going to want to call people from 10 years ago as opposed to more recently. So that might be something that you have to explain when you're at the point of reference checks in a job process. You would kind of explain to them that, you know, I'm no longer in contact with people from 10 years ago for this reason. But for more recent references as to the quality of my work, here are these people that I've worked with in whatever capacity in the past couple of years. If that makes sense. Awesome. Okay, well, I don't want to intrude on your time too much. So now is where I'm going to pass the presentation over so we get the employer's perspective. So my special guest today, her name is Caitlin Uden. She has worked in Parkland's Human Resources office for, I think, probably as long as I've worked at Parkland. And she has basically run a lot of job searches in a huge variety of fields. So she's got a lot of experience seeing what people are doing on their job applications for a variety of jobs. So let me make sure I do this correctly. I believe, Caitlin, if you start talking, it should make you the presenter.
Okay, can everyone see me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me, Julia, and thank you all for attending. Like Julia said, I've been working in recruiting and hiring and job searches for about 5 years. I've been in human resources for about 7 years, so time flies, you know, when you're having fun. I just wanted to share some tips and also maybe some funny examples of things maybe not to do. But the number one thing, I think when people ask me for resume advice or application advice for that matter, is to research the job and the employer that you are applying for. For example, if an employer has, you know, most employers have websites that you can go to just learn about their organization. Every job is going to have some kind of job description when you're applying. Most employers at this time are doing online job applications. I see very few employers that are not using some kind of online application system. Occasionally you'll see a job ad that asks you to just email your resume, but most of the time you're going to be filling out an application. And so it's going to have an online job description that goes with it. And one thing that's really important is to pay attention to what the job functions are, what the minimum requirements of the job are, and then what they are actually asking for. A lot of times employers will even spell out what they want to see on resume. For example, in their minimum requirements for the job, they may say that they're looking for, you know, 3 years of professional office experience. And so in that case, if that's something that you see, you want to make sure to include dates of when you worked and when you that experience. Because a lot of times, you know, recruiters or someone in my job who is reviewing so many resumes every day, they are really looking for, is this person qualified for the job or are they not qualified for the job? And so a lot of times you want to make it as clear as possible what your qualifications are. So I love Julia's example of the summary of qualifications, sort of just that snapshot that makes it really clear what experience you have. That's a really good one. Another thing you might see is an organization that has core values on their website or mission on their website. You might see them talk about the culture of their organization, and they might say, you know, we really value community service and our employees being involved. And so that would be a great example of when you would want to include volunteering or community service experience that you have. So really kind of paying attention to what the job is, what the organization is, to help you decide what sections to include on your resume. That's really important. And then I think the other advice that I would give is to try and avoid sort of gimmicks and theatrics. Probably the most memorable resume that I ever received was in the form of a candy bar wrapper. And, you know, I understand that the applicant was trying to be creative and trying to be eye-catching, but the sort of theatrics of it all, the resume being printed on the candy bar wrapper, really took away from that candidate's education and experience, because you're just kind of thinking about how ridiculous the gimmick is, you know? So while it is great to try and stand out, I really advise against using like bold colors and really loud resume styles, or sort of the cliche, you know, candy bar, fruit basket resume, things that you see, you know, on TV, because what you really want to be eye-catching is your resume in terms of your education and experience. So I love the examples, Julia, that you used were, you know, very clean, you know, black and white, very simple. It's definitely okay, especially the more creative the job is. So for example, for like a graphic designer job, you would want to be very creative in your resume style. But for the most part, and for most industries and positions, you want to keep it simple, clean, professional looking, so that the recruiter can focus on the content that's in your resume and not what it looks like. And then lastly, the one thing that's really important is to make sure that you're including some keywords that you read from the job posting in your resume, as long as they're true. I don't know if you have experience on online applications, but for a lot of them, the online application itself actually pulls keywords out of your resume and kind of gives the employer an idea of how much of a match your resume is to the position. And so, you know, if you see organizational skills in the job description, use that phrase, organizational skills, in your resume, and try and match it like that. And like Julia said, as long as it's true, don't overinflate your qualifications, but definitely, you know, try and tailor them to the position that you're applying for. But yeah, I think that's the main thing that I wanted to share. Does anyone have any questions that I can answer from, you know, an HR or employer perspective?
Well, you're welcome to think it over a little bit. Thank you very much, Caitlin, for that. I really would like to see what a candy bar resume looks like.
Can you have Caitlin tell them what her, ideally, I get this question a lot, and they may not be posing it now. Some of them have heard for a long time that resumes cannot be more than one page, and they don't know if it should be 1 or 2 pages, or the instances where you want to go to a second page. Could you expand on that just a little?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I get actually a lot. My advice would be to include what is relevant to the job. And whether that makes it 1 page or 2 pages doesn't matter as much as whether it is relevant. So Julia touched on it earlier. You know, you don't need to include your experience for the last 15 years. But you also don't need to cut out experience or qualifications just to fit everything on 1 page. My resume, for example, is 2 pages. So it really depends on, you know, what you have that is job related. So I think you can cut things that don't align with the position you're applying for, and maybe you add them in for the next position because it does align with that one. So really, again, just making sure that you're aligning your resume to the position that you're applying for.
Actually, piggybacking off of that, that made me think of when I was applying to be the director of TRIO. My resume for that was actually only 1 page because it focused on my most recent experience, and the people I was applying with knew me pretty well already. But when they were wanting to hire me for that job, because it's funded by the Department of Education wanted my resume as well. That resume was 2 pages because I wanted to make sure that I listed every single thing that I had done that showed that I met their requirements, because they were a little bit different. So I think Caitlin did a really great job of explaining how it kind of depends on the situation, but there's no hard and fast rule of it has to be 1 page or it has to be 2 pages.
And that's another reason, you know, if you feel like some people just really want it on 1 page, and I understand that, you know, it can look clean. That's another good reason to use sort of a simple format, because you're not getting, you know, half your page taken up by this header that says your name or something like that. So like Word, you'll see if you know, look at the different resume templates on Word, some of them are very complex and have, you know, big headers and big side banners, but then some of them are more simple and you have a lot more room for just text.
I was gonna say, it's been a while since I looked at the resume templates in Word, but that document from Career Services is very adamant, don't use the templates in Word, because I think of that, because they're kind of messy.
Yeah. They have recently added some more simple templates, but yeah, a lot of them are very messy is a good word.
That's funny. And actually in the handout that you have, I've listed, I think, 3 different websites that will, they help you brainstorm. So, you know, you can list your job that you worked at, and they help you brainstorm your duties and your accomplishments in those jobs. And those websites will then create the resume for you. Even if you do that, if you don't like what they end up creating for you, then you at least have all of the relevant information that you can then copy and put in your own document. So you can play around with different formats. Caitlin, do you have an idea of, so usually when I submit things online, if it's in a Word document, I save it as a PDF and submit it as a PDF. But I've heard that sometimes PDFs, like scanning software, can't handle them as well.
Yeah, so actually I have that as a note. So our applicant tracking system or our online application system actually prefers PDFs. A lot of application systems are different. If you are ever emailing a resume, I definitely recommend doing it as a PDF. And then a lot of times the HR department or the organization will have guidance for how to upload a document. For example, on ours, you know, it'll say Word document or PDF. But I definitely prefer, just as a recruiter, as someone who reviews resumes, them to be PDF, because I don't risk editing anything on your resume, and they're very easy to search.
We've got a question in the chat about applying for a work study position at the college, because we're all working online. How do we get in touch with the hiring department person? My guess is email, Caitlin.
Yes, so email would be the best. Currently, we don't have any student positions posted for summer or fall. We're not sure what the process will be yet for student positions, but as soon as we have an update, we will communicate with students about those available positions. So if you're not seeing any positions available currently, whether they're work study or non-work study, it's just because we aren't currently hiring yet for those under the current conditions.
Good to know. I actually know a lot of students who were awarded work study for the fall and are interested in a few months.
Mm-hmm.
We've got another question of whether a cover letter should always be included with a resume. I'm going to say, yes, it's a good idea. A cover letter is a whole different webinar, I think, but it's definitely a nice way for an employer to understand you and where you're coming from. And I think, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, but most people, when they're hiring, they want a resume and a cover letter.
Yep, I would definitely agree with that. We require both for all of our applications. I think, I've seen certainly, especially positions where they're getting a ton of applications, like they're letting you apply via LinkedIn, for example. They may not have the capacity for you to even upload a cover letter, but if there is the option, I would always recommend creating one. And yeah, I agree. We could probably talk about cover letters for another hour.
Great questions. Does anybody else have any questions? I know I pitched it a couple of times, but definitely if you have questions or you need help, reaching out to Brennan Hightower in Parkland's Career Services would be a smart move. Even just to read your resume once you think it's perfect, she would be a great person to do that. Should a cover letter be job specific? Absolutely. Your cover letter is probably your best chance to be a little more personalized, to tell or to show the employer what you are like. I'm sure, Caitlin, this is true for you as well. I've read so many boring, bad cover letters that's a wasted opportunity. It's your chance to kind of be interesting. And again,
yes,
I think we would need the whole hour to explain how to do that. But
yeah.
yes, definitely tailor it.
Yeah, definitely job specific, definitely organization specific. You want to show that you've done a little bit of research at least on the organization. Summarize again your education and experience, but really talk about, why you're interested in the position and in the company in general. I think it's another sort of platform to be able to sell yourself without just relisting every single thing that's on your resume.
Well, and the cover letter also is a great chance to explain if there's something that might be a little bit confusing about your resume. I think was something Janelle who mentioned going from teaching dance to working in IT. The cover letter is your perfect chance to sort of explain why you're making this career move, but also maybe to show why it kind of makes sense, what skills and what experience you have from being a dance teacher make you surprisingly a strong fit for Google IT. You have a little more leeway in the cover letter there. Oh, awesome. And Shamir has included a way to make appointments for help with cover letters. And that's also something that I think Career Services can help with. So you guys got lots of people behind you. Awesome. Well, we got about 4 more minutes if anybody has other questions. Again, my email's on the handout, so feel free to email me as well. And yeah, lots of ways to answer questions. Aw, thanks, Janelle. This has been really fun for me, actually, and I'm glad that Caitlin was able to join us because it's kind of cool to see different ends of it.
Caitlin, do you mind giving a little bit more in terms of when they're listing skills and what type of sections you prefer to see when you're looking at candidates, how they choose to go about maybe wording their sections when they're listing their skills? There's a few different ways, and obviously there's no one size fits all, as Julia spoke to earlier, but if you were looking at a candidate, can you give an idea of what you might like to see when skills are listed in a specific section?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think it is specific to the job, and I hate for that to be the answer to everything, but it's really important to get to know the job that you're applying for. But one thing, again, to keep in mind is that someone who is a hiring manager or a recruiter, and everywhere does hiring a little bit differently. But if you're applying for a job, either the person hiring you, your manager, or a recruiter will be the one looking at your resume. And so making it as easy to identify the qualifications that they are asking for in the job posting. That should be your main objective, is making it very easy for me when I'm looking at your resume to say, okay, do they have the associate's degree? Do they have the 2 years of office experience? Do they have, a year of customer service experience? Because the more someone has to dig for that, the more likely it is that your resume is going to be overlooked. And so I think it's just important to keep it clean. I prefer on a resume to have education, work experience, knowledge, skills, and abilities. And then I'll typically include references, or, if that's not something that you're comfortable with, you could even say, references available upon request. But that's sort of the format that I like to see. But it could change, depending on the employer.
All right, well, unless we have any last minute questions, we are right at the 2 o'clock mark. So thank you, everybody. I think we got a good crowd and some great questions, and this was really helpful for me. Hopefully you got something out of it as well. All right, so I did mention that I've recorded this. I'm going to be sending the recording to Shamir, so if you need to reference anything, I will send him my PowerPoint slides as well in case you want that. But yeah, feel free to email me if you have any further questions. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the session. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.